Members of Congress, I now have the high privilege and distinct honor of presenting to you His Excellency Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dr. Deep State. Our episode today is titled The Doomsday Cult and the Deep State, Part 1. So there's so much to go into. I think I need to break it down into a few segments, and I think it's perhaps the most important question that we could be asking today, and that is there a doomsday cult that wants to bring on sort of nuclear apocalypse, Armageddon? And so we're going to look at that question and think about it. And what I am doing here is going back 7 years to a small series I did, and I'm going to pull from that a little bit and think about the question that I was approaching then 7 years ago and a little bit today, and just getting a perspective on where we're at with this overarching idea of the concept of a doomsday cult, And when I did this 7 years ago, this was on the far fringes. It's a little bit more known. I know one commentator that actually had this shot from way back in the early 1990s. So we're going to be talking about characters like Rebbe Schneerson and, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu, and what the significance of this meeting was, this group was, where they fit into sort of history, the history of human affairs, redemption history. How serious should we take this at this moment, just to kind of get you going? Rebbe Schneerson is the leader of a movement that we, for the sake of this conversation, are going to call the Doomsday Cult. We want to put that in the context of a larger movement, an even larger movement. But there was a prophecy as he's speaking here that he wants to bring on the Mashiach and have Netanyahu do something that will bring on the Mashiach. So we want to be thinking about that. What does that mean? What does that mean? And he even prophesied that in your lifetime, Benjamin, the Mashiach will come in your lifetime. So he's really putting the pressure. What are you doing? What are you doing? And he says, we're doing. So I think the question's so big that I don't want to try to take it on at one time. So today we're just introducing the topics. We'll pull a little bit from 7 years ago and think a little bit about how other commentators are maybe almost broaching the subject. And we're going to think about some of the changes that have happened over the last 7 years. And mostly, I want to really focus on what is the end game? Where are we going? I don't want to build. I want to kind of put that up front. What's going on here? And I'll just kind of skip around and do a little bit of the who, what, where, why. I want to finish when I have the final part of this, putting the pieces together, what we could know about this. So before I continue, I will just put this idea up here, and I do want to give some credit to Henry Mako. He is one of the few people that's talked about this I've been researching it. I think I started researching this topic 11 years ago, and I found him way back then. And more recently, he revisits his claims that he made. So here's a starting point for a question that Netanyahu has been trying to drag the world into a war with Iran or other neighboring countries. It's connected to this 1991 promise from Rebbe Schneerson to start a catastrophic war in order to bring on the Mashiach. And what I'm suggesting right now is, if true, this should be the most important question that nobody is asking. And to give you a bit of an update, I did notice Michael Matt had a program last night. He actually brought up the visual with Schneerson and Benjamin Netanyahu, and it was so new to people. He was just kind of putting it out there. So it's a very new concept to people. And I'm going to kind of generally say what I said 7 years ago when I presented this. And again, kind of thinking about what's happened in 7 years that would maybe adjust how we're thinking about this in any way. Let me, for a moment, begin by just showing you a bit from 7 years ago and how I introduced the topic then. Is a fanatical doomsday cult responsible for pushing the world toward nuclear destruction? That's the question I want to ask today. And it's a question I think too few are asking. Where am I going? We talked before about a force behind the idols of this world, a force behind the rulers of this world, a force behind the religious leaders of this world. And oftentimes this force is referred to in both esoteric and biblical terms as the snake. And we are going to consider the head of this snake. So one of the recent depictions we have of world events is this binary between these two world leaders. Between the two seeds. So in that sense, the snake was broken apart, but was still left in charge of the world. What we see with this messianic strain within the Venetian oligarchy is this idea of bringing the snake together into a singularity or a oneness, an exceptionally Kabbalistic idea. Again, we're juxtaposing a biblical idea, God standing outside of creation, with this idea that is atomistic, reductionistic, pantheistic, that God is in a million pieces in all of us, but it has to be brought into a oneness. Okay, so I want to suggest here that one of the critical variables in the Venetian oligarchy is, of course, the international bankers. And if we Okay, so we got a little bit of the idea. So one of the things I was proposing there is, let's use a social science approach to kind of think. It's a big question. Is there some small group that's maybe attached to a larger group that could bring on Armageddon or set off the events of a world war? And so I think, as someone trained in political science, I can't imagine a more important question. But frankly, asking this question, doing the investigation, would be about as fruitful as saying, I'm going to critique or seriously investigate the Holocaust. it would be at that line. So we can't do it at the university. I make that point throughout my presentation 7 years ago. But if we were going to use the instruments of social science, which approximate science, so you want to do something that's observable, measurable, reproducible, and use those good methods of investigation to come out with a conclusion. Is there a group that has that kind of influence? That would be a dependent variable. And then we could say other forces in the world that we could consider that would also contribute, but can we say how likely it is? And I concluded, I did a few smaller segments that it turned out to be a 3-part series. And I said, using social science techniques, it seems like that there is a fair amount of explanatory weight saying that indeed this group exists and indeed it should be taken seriously. So I'm going to put that in a larger context and have us think about that group. But for now, I want to just come back and think about the WHO. So the WHO we're going to talk about is specifically this group called the Chabad Lubavitchers. And Rebbe Schneerson was the head of that group. And the shot that you saw was from 91, 92 with Benjamin Netanyahu. And so we're going to say, like, what is he also connected to? What is the agenda? What are they trying to achieve? And why? And where is it going on in the world? So we'll hit on some of those little points today as we're sort of bringing all of this together. And right now, I would like to just give us a little bit of a background on when we talk about this group, who they are. And these the group, I believe we could come over to Wikipedia. And one thing you're going to notice is something that I highlighted 7 years ago, which is you can see a lot just from really the photographs of what they're connected to. Wikipedia is kind of telling us their breakoff point in terms of their segment within their movement. And you can see here that they will be repeating these key photographs among heads of state from around the world. And as I suggested 7 years ago, that alone is very curious. What kind of group gets access to all of the heads of state? And I would say one of the people joined to this group is Benjamin Netanyahu. And I began with the shot of how he was greeted this year in our legislative assembly with Kim Jong-il virtually, is everybody standing up and clapping, you better be, kind of thing. So certainly one of the leaders attached to this movement has a great weight on the U.S. economy, the U.S. military, U.S. spending, and we don't need to go into that all day. So I don't want to be too controversial here at this moment, but he has been recognized by both the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice and other humanitarian organizations as a war criminal. So it is kind of curious to title this The Doomsday Cult and the Deep State, because whether we call that visible state, how connected it is to the deep state or response to those kind of things, we know that there is some connection between Benjamin Netanyahu, going back to Schneerson, we're already seeing a basic connection, and the heads of state throughout the world. So it makes us wonder, well, what is the agenda? And what are we dealing with here? So I will be bouncing around between the who, what, where, why, and when. What I would like to introduce right now is a video from an episode of The Greystone where they're talking about Meir Kahana, and he's very associated with this. And one of the ideas, even before I began, is this what's considered extremism over there. And he's part of this extremist movement that's very closely aligned with the Lubavitchers. So I want to just show you two people speaking about him. Okay. So I once had an introductory video about 6 months ago with Mara Kahana doing a talk in 1992. My bad, 2002 in Brooklyn, New York. And he begins by saying, first, we're going to clean out the Gazans, then the Lebanese, then the Syrians, and then Edom, Amalek. And he's very specific, then the Christians, then the Buddhists, and so forth. So he is what we would call extreme. He's openly talking about purging, like this is population control. And this is this language that was used about Gaza, Amalek, kill them all. And so he's very influential in Israel, in politics, and his ideas are very closely associated with this doomsday cult. So those two fellas there on the gray zone in that segment are both Jewish guys. And I think they would consider themselves critics of what's going on in the Middle East, critics of Zionism. And I do watch several of these people, Glenn Greenwald. There's a duo over called Do Dissidents. There's this gal right here. And what I'm suggesting here is that they're all Jewish, and there is a media contingent of people critical of Zionism, critical of what's going on, critical of the role of Zionism in international power and U.S. power controlling decisions. And I do want to just take that into account. Let me just play her just for a moment so you get a sense. Her name's Katie Halper. Okay, so you get the idea of where I'm going with that. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, say I think some of the best reporting right now is by Jewish people. Most of them, maybe I'm American, I tend to watch that, are American. And I think that that's extremely valuable. They're on the avant-garde of the critique of the power that we saw displayed with Benjamin Netanyahu, the use of American resources and weapons to achieve the ends of Zionism. And what I'm including in here is this larger story of what are these ends, and in particular, where does this doomsday cult fit into all of this? So I'm jumping around so much here. Sorry about that. what I'm going to do right now is suggest, well, I want to put this in a bit of context. And I think that um, these commentators, these Jewish commentators, as important as they are, and in fact, a number of times they interlink with each other on different episodes, and oftentimes they say we really need to form an alliance with any kind of thinker that's anti-Zionist. And I think at one level I could go along with that. I share a lot in common with what they are saying. As a traditional Catholic, I have more than a few caveats about this, and this is where I'm kind of taking a more punctuated turn with this. And we have to see, they're really hitting, I don't believe, the head of the snake when we say Zionism. So we know that so much is encapsulated by this term Zionism, and we really have to ask ourselves, what exactly is Zionism? It's an important question because we can talk about this idea of security for Jewish people somewhere in the world. I guess that's the standard response to that. And that was created in 1947-48 with the nation state of Israel. It's the kind of standard response for that. And it was just supposed to be for security. And then it was sort of conspiracy language to talk about a greater Israel. But now that's been externalized, that our security requires a greater Israel. And part of what Merrick Kahana and other doomsdayers will say, there's video after video, once we get that land, it's the whole enchilada. So where does this go after this? So I want to put this in some context. What is Zionism? And I think that Zionism is a movement that came on the late 18th, early 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century. And it's really part of many other movements. And that's what I go over in my first episode, between a line of a rabbinic line and a banking line, and put all that together. And I don't quite want to do that today, but I want to jump to really where this project is going. And so what I would like to do now is suggest that what I'm trying to do here is get, we can kind of, all the dots come together in this puzzle when we say, where is what's the ultimate aim of Zionism? Where does it come from? And how do we fit into this? And I would say the deep state perspective is willing to go there. I have to be a little careful with how I situate the conversation, but I want us to really remind ourselves of some of the central ideas here. One thing I'm going to mention here is that essentially Zionism, what it truly is, it's attached to a much older agenda. It's just a modern, more political power means to achieve these ends. And I'm afraid these, for all the credit I give them, the Jewish podcasters miss this essential piece of what I have always talked about. I finished talking about there in the little bit I just presented, but again, our narrative always comes back to the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, this ancient and eternal enmity. And it operates throughout history, whether it's human history or redemption history, in a very predictable modus operandi. So what I'm going to suggest here, and I'm going to come back to the document, before Zionism was a thing, the church had recognized the agenda is part of an ancient enmity between the church and the synagogue. And so Zionism is really part of what Father Fahey would call organized naturalism. This morning over on Locals, we dug into our topic from the metaverse, and we talked about a world being transformed from the vertical into the horizontal. And by the way, I'm going to leave links. We're digging into this slowly, nice and slowly, in pursuit of the metaverse. Last time we talked about hyper reality. Today we talked about, it was titled Modernity as Simulacrum. That from Machiavelli on, modern politics fits us into sort of a circuit, a self-referential reality. So we think communism is one mode of that, but liberalism is another mode of that. So if these things kind of sound interesting, it's really based on an approach to this topic based upon the image, the beatific vision versus the utopian vision of man. So the God's utopian vision, and the serpent gets this throughout time. Because just as Christianity has a telos, a singularity directed at the image, the beatific vision of God, the authority of God, and the new heaven and the new earth, this vision, the telos, the end game that we're putting down here, here's how it's motivated through, here's how it operates throughout time. Through millennial dreams, it takes our beatific vision and puts it horizontally. Ever since Montesquieu created the modern republic in a circuit format, it puts everything in the beatific vision, the transcendent vision, into the vertical, into what St. Augustine would call the city of man. And it's driven by political religion, which is modern religion and modern politics in short, guided by the proposition or the precept of liberalism. And ultimately its telos is aimed toward techno-utopia. So even Montesquieu Machiavelli recognized he's taking the transcendent and putting it into the eternal. So that's what we're talking about over here. So what are they guided for? What is this techno-utopian vision? And again, I have to remind ourselves, this isn't a one-off. Over on the channel on Locals, the link will be in the description. This is what our community goes over, all the many, many memory hold documents that confirm this exact cosmic conspiracy. That's what we talk about in Seeing Through the Singularity. That link will also be in the description section. So this has been recognized by the saints of the church since the 1st century. So this is a kind of a modern pulling together in 1890 in this church approved document. And then we go through the 20th century, whether it's bishops, cardinals, priests, heads of state, we go over and over the exact same cosmic conspiracy. And I did end up my series 7 years ago that it very much appears as if the Doomsday Cult, the Chabad Leibovichers, are the tip of the spear of this conspiracy, which includes the people of the earth being subjugated to this rule. There's nothing, the rule of the Jews. This is nothing shocking. This is what Christ's own apostles thought he came to achieve. So who will treat the person at their discretion. In other words, Noahide, 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 and slaughter Amalek at the end, Christianity. So essentially what this is a movement. Zionism is a movement that we can trace back all the way back to the Garden of Eden. We can trace it back to the 1st century. But what Father Fahey would call organized Judaism, I think it's really helpful for us, and this is what we do in our work when we're breaking it down over on our Locals channel, really pull it back to the 13th century. At that point, we have the advance of the Zohar, Kabbalah, and other figures like Maimonides. I can't get into all of those, but the Zohar is the beginning of dialectic. They worship a God that has no essence. So they themselves become the force. As Albert Pike would say, this God of forces. Their God is both evil and good, but has no essence. So in a sense, whereas in Christianity, we serve God, in their opposing worldview, they worship a God that serves them. And so they work through both playing off good, evil. So they own the means of production, as Karl Marx would say, and create a world. This is Kabbalah, where the world stage, the actors are controlled to move it forward toward that end, where all the resources are controlled, the minds of people are made kosher and controlled, and everybody lives in a techno-utopia under Noahide laws at the discretion of the Jasons. So Maimonides is appearing at that same time, and he's really he's the granddaddy of the Noahide. He's the one that decided what the means would be the explanation for this. And all of these doomsday cult people, ultimately that's the granddaddy, just like Ben Shapiro likes to talk about him constantly. So that's where they draw from the Zohar, this idea of a dialectic God that they use to achieve their ends. So once again, the direction of all of this stuff is taking millennial dreams that we're attached to and moving it forward through creating a modern religion that's going to move toward this techno-utopia, which is the end really of modern liberalism. And we called the episode today Modernity as Simulacrum, a self-referential view where nothing really gets you back to base reality. So really we're talking about, when we talk about Zionism. So of course, these Jewish podcasters who I really do have to give a lot of credit to. Very few are touching what they are with the reach that they do, and their openness to really have an alliance with other non-Zionists, I think, is good. But what's going to be missing from that alliance, and perhaps ultimately take it in the wrong direction, is one of the details like Noahide laws and what I just explained to you. Now, there's one Jewish person I know of that will talk about this stuff, and that's Henry Makow. And again, for this particular topic, I sometimes draw from his archives because he's covered this for years. So without that, you're still, if we think of the church and the synagogue, we want to make Jewishness minus that. I give you a lot of credit for it, but we're still dealing with apples and oranges here, unfortunately. So that, I think, is the most important thing, is the agenda is to Zionism. It's disguised as security, and it's code to rule the world under what Christians would call an antichrist. So again, the puzzle, why so many people don't see that, why evangelicals buy in and support it, why Catholics, so many can't see that Trump is very much a part of this. And let's just do a few pictures here. Let's do a couple pictures here, just so we have to kind of remind ourselves of the power of the organization. And I'm going to suggest that what I did in my first episode, what we call the owners and controllers of international financial capital, what Karl Marx would call the commanding heights of the economy, those international, I think that one of the apexes of this is identified as the Bank of International Settlements, which is the bank on top of the central banks. And you get the idea, the old pyramid. So when we see photographs like very recently, Trump giving really worship to Schneerson, he's over there with Benny and his son-in-law, and this just kind of goes past most Christians, most Catholics. It's like, okay, he's over there. We're so used to seeing people put on a yarmulke and lean against a wailing wall that it just seems kind of part of that shtick. But this is a person that essentially said the same as Kahana: kill them all, any means necessary. And so we have to, and that's what I did in the first episode, went through some photographs and said, we have to kind of think through this. What's going on here? And we see, of course, those photographs with all of the powers. And just like some people will say, Trump is playing whatever, it's 3D chess or is it 5D chess? Putin, many people will, Trump, just keep your enemies close. your friends close and your enemies closer. And I guess Putin is playing 7D chess. And if he's playing 7D chess, what is Zelensky playing? And I can show you if I get to it today, 7 years ago, I'm going really around the world showing these kind of pictures. So what do we make of their influence just superficially? And there's Schneerson. And essentially, Makow's concept here is they're moving into a world of Noahide. This is an ancient agenda. This is part of the political arm of this Zionism to bring in Noahide, a world of Noahide, because the Mashiach will live in a world governed by Noahide laws. So as Trump is saying, we're going to pull out of the United Nations, we see at the same time assemblies of these international courts, which are necessary to do this. So some of this stuff is going on in our own time. And let me play for you just a little bit from 7 years ago so we can kind of get a little sense of where I was then. I really haven't advanced. The only things that have advanced, my feelings, frankly, are the same. And my investigations and what I see and whatever explanatory weight I gave to it then, I still do. What's changed is some of the events in the world. But let me play that clip from 7 years ago for you. Okay, that gives us a little bit of an idea. So, of course, the way this dialectic works is through problem, reaction, solution, creating chaos, introducing a problem. And I think secular analysts have a tough time figuring out like why Israel is trying to alienate the entire world. Like, what would its end be? And in a way, the goals of this doomsday cult are one of the few things that actually make sense in that regard. How do you make sense of Ukraine other than stirring a pot and introducing this Gog and Magog war, setting up all of the parts together to introduce a cataclysmic event that has been prearranged with a prearranged solution? How else would somebody really make sense of Stargate, Trump's initiative, AI initiative, along with the anti Semitic legislation and so forth? But more importantly, really provoking the whole world through trade wars, China, Mexico, Canada. Like, how else, other than really just fomenting chaos in the world, does this make sense? So, and we always kind of keep our minds, I've been doing this a while, on that all the parts seem to get together, all the parts seem to come together around that idea. So, what I'd like to do right now is think, just really enforce, is that I've introduced this before a number of times, obviously, really since the beginning of the channel. And I just want to really get our heads around this idea. Again, our Jewish friends won't really pull together. They go very far, and I give them a lot of credit. But let's just look. Again, you can look at my channel over there, or our community's channel, and all of the memory hold material that's going on over there. But just a few introductions, just a few points here to make is this idea that what's the case? Like, what is going on? Where are they moving toward? We have been at the bottom not merely of the latest Great War, but this admission here that really all of the wars, from the French Revolution to the Russian Revolution, some claim credit for the Protestant Revolution, so that this dialectic at work, but always aiming toward a telos, an end, a utopian vision. So not just the latest Great War, but nearly all of your wars, not only of Russia, but of every major revolution in your history. We have brought discord and confusion and frustration into your personal and public lives. We are still doing it. No one can tell us how long, no one can tell how long we shall keep going with this. And I don't even have the quote by Maurice Strong, you Gentiles, we will destroy, it's what we do. But we always have to kind of keep in mind, what is the vision they're chasing and what do they want us to do? And in our investigation, we finished the book over on locals, and a big part of this Noahide is what they call making the pig kosher. So they are going to use the word Christianity minus the Trinity, minus the nature of Christ being divine, and the central cornerstones of our belief system here on earth, the enmity between the church and the synagogue, that has to be erased. And really a lot of what's going through these, I've showed it on here a few times. Right now, if you Wikipedia Bible scripture that's prohibited, there are new measures that essential passages of the Bible have to be removed. So it will take the name Christianity, but it will be made kosher to serve the synagogue. And so what we could see today in this regard is the forging of an anti-church. The historical mission of our world revolution, and for many of you, what should probably tick off is, E. Michael Jones, a book on the world revolution. The historical mission, the end game of our world revolution is to rearrange a new culture of humanity to replace the previous system. And that's the same message as the Masons, right? The phoenix will rise once, as like Maurice Strong said, like once we've pulverized Christendom, Christian civilization, that's kind of part of what needs to happen in order for the Mashiach to come on the world stage. We've learned from our documents over here that first you control the resources and then the minds of the world. So to replace the previous social order, this conversion and reorganization of global society. And Father Fahey wrote a number of books where he would use that phrase, the reorganization. That's what's going on right now. And of course, a lot of this has been externalized. Klaus Schwab called it the Great Reset. And we learned about Yuval Harari and transhumanism. And we were told to beware of these people. And somehow we can't see the exact same reorganization of society under the administration of Donald Trump. So that brings, in mind what this seems to be some kind of great deception going on here. The conversion and reorganization of global society requires two essential steps. Firstly, the destruction of the old established order. Secondly, the design and imposition of a new order. The first stage requires the elimination of all frontier borders, nations, culture, public policy, ethnic borders, and social influence. And that explains a lot of policies like mass migration. So everything that makes a people, nations, borders, nations, culture, all of those things have to be eliminated to make this new type of person in this new world order. Public policy, ethnic barriers, and social definitions can only be destroyed. Old system elements be replaced by the imposed system elements of a new order. The first task of our system is destruction. And if you've never seen this one before, some people will say, well, we don't know if that's, it's again, we go over all the memory hold. It's the same cosmic conspiracy against God and man, against Christ and the church. So we have here in a letter between Marx and Levay, the people themselves, and this is hard for the Zohar, the God that rabbinical Judaism worships, is a God without essence. He's so transcendent that he's beyond forms. So without essence, that means he's the opposite of God. The God that we worship in the Christian tradition is all being. There is no bad. It's perfect truth, justice, beauty, love. Their God is beyond. So they'd say it's so amazing that they can't speak of it, but it's without essence. So what does that mean? That it's a God of forces, both good and evil. It's a God that serves us. And once you say it that way, you start getting the idea. Albert Pike in Morals and Dogma said, the God we worship is a God of forces that serves us. Or as Nietzsche would say, we, when we're willing to become beyond good and evil, we worship a God, but we ourselves are beyond a category of good and evil. When we do that, we can change the world. We can make the world a theater, and we can become gods by controlling the production and the staging, the stagecraft of that world. And in a sense, then we become our own gods. That's the goal of Freemasonry, but there's another select class, and that would be the Schneersonlights that think they are already there. They are divinized. It will attain world dominion. Again, the same phrase, abolition of frontiers. What we call the nation state over there will lead other people and into the hands It's the same thing as the Christian civilization agenda of 1890. And nay, we go over and over and over. Heads of state, diplomats, captains of industry, cardinals, bishops, and many in the hierarchy have revealed the same thing. It's the promise of the Talmud. They will have the property of the world. It's exactly what we go through in our documents. So once we see that, we might kind of think about scripture in a new way when it says, well, what is Antichrist? Those people that deny the divinity of Christ. Well, don't yoke yourself with them. Did you see in the opening statement, the members of our lawmaking class are clapping like seals for this person? And again, so we know the destiny. The Talmud's destiny is a utopia, the J utopia, using what they call technology as mediated ascension. So the technology just helps them dominate and rule and introduce Noahide. So we see then a bit of how it works out. It's a cycle. And without seeing the getting a little cynical or getting a little bit real or being prepared to follow Christ when he said, don't take the leaven of the Pharisees. And then we know typologically that they are the tip of the spear. And so we see the cycle of manufacturing events. And one of the things we suggest always on here is we're in an ontological war for reality. And that's what we discussed this morning over on Locals. We want to get back to the fullness of reality that was revealed to us from a God that has essence, and he revealed it through scripture, tradition, the incarnation of Christ. So the vision we have is a vision that's locked on to that reality. And in this counter vision, then, it's always an attack. When we said the attack on reality, the ontological, because God is being, that's reality. And this other one is a God that has no being, and it's creating an artificial reality, a simulacrum of reality. So this new world order will be a copy of reality, a self-referential world. And I don't want to get too off on this, but that is communism. So for Marx, just like it was the case for Machiavelli, there is no transcendent realm. So there's the labor. It's a constant dialectic between workers and labor, the people that control the means of production. So there's a dome over top. They create their own firmament. And the pictures on the wall that you're chasing are the ones that the theater masters create in your head. So it's very much like Plato's cave, and it's controlled in that fashion. So that's the sense. Liberalism has its own sort of cave, but ultimately what we argue in this book is liberalism is going in the same direction. We can see the connections between liberalism and Zionism, somehow that they're security buddies, and it's the exact same telos point as communism. So in that sense, they're all getting on the same train together, and they're all part of this wash cycle of creating an event. And it's so, when I talk about this, it's so important to get back to reality, to see staging as part of how the serpent works in history. And in our simulacrum, we're not supposed to say that. And so it makes it very tough to see how the enemy of the church works, because it's literally what they do. They have a cycle that traps you in their self-referential reality. So I argue that it's very important to recognize that cycle. And what I'd suggest even more so with the cycle is getting lost in, I believe, the vibe that's being created today. Part of their egregore of this God of forces that they want to pull you into is this idea of allowing them to put the pictures in your head of where we're going. And one of the pictures they took and put in people's heads recently is this messianic idea, preparing that type of thinking, that memetics for the Mashiach that Rebbe Schneerson told Benjamin Netanyahu that in his vision, I might say demonic vision, that he said would come about in Netanyahu's own lifetime. So a lot of Americans, a lot of people around the world are lost in this vision. I have empirically, the best I could, put a link on a video I called Killing the Magic Messiah, the Magic Bullet Messiah. And in that, I went through a forensic case to say that this story is impossible. Nobody was actually at that point. You have to see it. So there's two links that my idea was to present. Everybody else just repeats it. Like, how could it? We saw it. And I just say that, no, not this event was part of this to get you to a preconceived finish, problem, reaction, solution, to put and think about the master of this. The last one, you always have to end up with anti-Semitic legislation, which is the forerunner of Noahide, to get you to fear, to call out the system, to get lost in the mometics. So when we're lost in that photograph, or when we're going with a group of people, kicking it up at Mar-a-Lago, we're lost in the sauce. And so it really makes us hard to kind of reconcile this with events going on in the world and just thinking about who Schneerson is. This is the guy that several times Trump and his, I'll call him his handler, his son-in-law. That's what, many of these rabbis will come up and say, he's running the show. He's the intermediary, the son-in-law. So we kind of get this idea when we kind of get into this agenda that the idea here is to divide and conquer. They're colonists of the world. To dominate the world, you have to divide and conquer. We will try to pit these countries against themselves, suck them into civil wars. The world we live in, young against old, male versus female, West versus East, rich versus poor, as many gender dysphoria versus everything else. We'll create the wokeness, we'll create the problem, and then we'll solve a tiny bit of it and show you, get you into this messianism. So I'm just kind of reminding us here that that there is this project for indeed a greater land space over there. And part of what they need with their Moloch rituals is some bodies on the ground. And Slavic bodies would be great. So I want to finish today by simply asking the question. I'm doing a who, what, where, why. We touched a little bit on the Lubavitchers. And I was going to take a reel from 8 years ago where it kind of shows the Lubavitchers, South America, throughout Europe, throughout Asia. They're everywhere, right? So they seem to get this very deferential greeting wherever they go. And we know that Trump's son-in-law here is holding some anti-Semitic legislation. Well, it's an executive order. And he, of course, is part of the tribe within the tribe. So he's a straight up Lubavitcher. They got him kind of clean shaven so that he can, I guess, do what he needs to do. But the end there, as far as Christians should be concerned, is that blade. And that should really snap people out of it. This presentation should at least get people thinking. But perhaps for the most part, I'm speaking to the choir. So when I continue here, as I finish this video, what has gone on between 7 years ago and today in the world? Because 7 years ago, I think it was 2018, would have been difficult I almost thought I did this in 2017. Anyway, what are some of the events that have happened that would move that agenda forward, that would increasingly, again, with our mountain of memory hold material that's available on our link over there in locals, what would also suggest that the agenda has been pushed in a particular direction that would help achieve um, population control, world domination, and ultimately Noahide, which is what they say is making the pig kosher. So we had the big event. Oh, let me go back just so you can see the visual I had up there again, just in case you didn't see it. So let's make doubly sure we're getting it on here. So what has happened that would bring us closer, frankly, to Noahide? And I can only touch on the events here, frankly. So in the last 7 years, we had the big pandemic, and I said part of the agenda is the externalization. You will know, mark of the beast time, who the people on the ground are that you're serving. So remember, they serve a God that serves them. So to serve their God, you are serving them, this egregore, this demonic mind prison. And you get there by rejecting reality piece by piece, by acquiescing the fullness of reality, Christ and his church, piece by piece. And next thing you know, you're in St. Augustine's city of God, and you're now operating in a simulacrum, a city of man, but it's such a good copy that you prefer the copy over the original. You're living in hyperreality, or what we called this morning modernity as simulacrum. So yes, straight up there. What are you saying? There's a cosmic conspiracy going on. They let you know what we call the deep state, all the people in decision-making positions for foreign and domestic policy, the people that could pull this off. And again, why I call it the empire of spectacle, because upon the world stage, the same images were put out there that had the same desired effect. So that's a big one. And how did that move? Well, first of all, it accomplished so many of those typical objectives: crushing family businesses, picking them up for pennies on a dollar, consolidating those resources, and injecting people with what Catherine Austin Fitts called an operating system. So that achieved this implementation under the skin of an operating system among many people in the world. And I can't even remember up on the oh, yep, there's the big guy cleaning up the swamp. And many people, as long as it appeared that he did some things with woke, that seems fabulous. And I'd suggest that they need to, when you're serious about reality, you have to look at the whole picture. And when I repeat all the time this line about a great deception in 2 Thessalonians 2:10, it's really about embracing the fullness of truth. And that's something we repeat over here. These egregores, or what Eric Fogelin would call second realities, these simulacrums, they're created because the inconvenient part of the truth, the whole truth, is put away. That's where we began opening up these artificial realities. What else has happened? Well, we have, I didn't even go into Ukraine. Oh my gosh, that's big. So one page of this ended and another page opened all at once with that whole event over there. And we see, again, one of the telltale signs of this is both parties, wherever your parliament is, both parties getting on board, clapping for the synagogue. And we see Trump Gaza, that I think for some people that was a point kind of too far. People that had really drunk the Kool-Aid almost had to step back and go, but I don't think they're quite there yet. And that's what happens when we give our consent over. who we watch, what pictures we put in our head. And sometimes even if we formally go to the voting mechanism, and I know that's a hard one for people to go, but that mechanism in this Machiavellian republicanism, these Masonic republics, that's such a feature that was built into the system. We discussed that this morning, that your consent, you lose part of the essence of your, I don't want to get too metaphysical here. So we saw this event. A lot of things have happened that seemingly, in that time, Trump said that the capital of the world would be Jerusalem, and that's part of the new order. So he brought us a little closer there. Everything's green light with ethnic cleansing. That's a part of that's part of the program. So many things. The idolization, the blatant idolatry involved with this, and we got the operating system. We had the dialectic between, can anybody remember her name over here in the States? What do they call her? Camel toe or something? And they had the dialectic going on here. And like magic, like chaos magic, everybody bought into it. And we see, constantly it's externalized. Hey, behind the scenes, we all hang out with each other. We want you guys to hate each other, but we're in the club. We're in the club. And so each of us is going, well, at least it's not Kamala. And then you'll see a photograph. It'll merge one of these days with them all hanging out together. So what else do we have? We got closer to AI serfdom, because part of this making the pig kosher in this new world order, this techno utopia, is really modeled on a serfdom model, where there's a tiny elite and everybody else is there in service, because this is part of the promise of the Talmud, right? Each person would have many, many servants, slaves. So Trump externalized that the first week in office, put these people, lifetime, what are called tech bros, that have pretty much lifetime allegiance to Mossad, and they're impending the surveillance system that they're creating, down to being able to read your mind in some Orwellian fashion. These were all just put in front of you. And the way the synagogue operates, they put it there like a trial balloon, no pushback. It's called chutzpah. We're beyond good and evil, and we will keep pushing the envelope using Kabbalah the whole time, or what I've called biopolitics. It's the politics embedded in our modern world and in our modern institutions. So we're much, much closer. Although in Singularity, which was released 5 years and 3 months ago, we talk about the end game of artificial intelligence. And we kind of said that's Christ, or that's the Mashiach ruling with a iron rod. So a lot of things have advanced in the last 5 years, bringing us closer to Noah. And then we have, of course, what was going on even a year ago on college campuses here in America, people that noticed ethnic cleansing. You noticed, okay, we're going to come and send our thugs and beat you up, and nobody's going to say anything. So the people that notice now are going to be, I guess the deal is deported as the part of the program. So as our vice president speaks over Europe about freedom of speech, here in America, we have the advancement of this, which is the platform for Noah. And again, he's got what appears to be his Shabbat handler right there. Very convenient. And that really is a stepping stone for the next level, really bringing forth these ideas of Maimonides, that this would be part of the world. This is almost 1,000 years ago. This is who they're really, Ben Shapiro, the son-in-law there. Trump's inauguration, he has somebody speaking where, again, part of the dialectic is he's talking to, I think, a female Anglican priest with gender dysphoria over here. part of killing that civilization in its probably more respectable forms, historically speaking. And instead, a person literally with a PhD in Noahide is right up there describing what he calls America moving forward within its Judeo-Christian culture. And so it's right there. You just kind of say, well, what is your culture? It's the Zohar. That's right. That's the program. Zohar, a God that has no being, is somehow attached to a guy with being. So oxymoron, when you buy it, you buy into the staging of everything else. I know that's dramatic to say, but that's, I think, been demonstrated quite a bit here. So we're living with a group of people over there where 96, 97% of the people are down with Mayor Kahana's program that is just the first peg in a larger depopulation program. So I am going to finish today. I went over a little bit of the who, what, where, why, and when. I wanted to introduce sort of the heads of the Chabad Lubavitchers, around. And what do you take from this kind of photographic evidence? Even the stuff presented on Wikipedia. What do you do with this? So I would suggest in closing today that certainly this needs to be given significant explanatory weight in terms of a dependent variable, which is there a group, does it exist, that has the power and influence to start a major and catastrophic war in order to achieve prophecy, a desired end, the arrival of a Mashiach. And I began by introducing just the power one of the leaders representing that movement politically, Benjamin Netanyahu, has in America. We don't need to go into the lobbyists for all of them, AIPAC, and really all the money they get from the synagogue through BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, the military, pharmaceutical, media, industrial complex. It's all aimed toward the same objective, which is really taking the dreams that belong to God, putting them, getting you attached to a political philosophy, a political religion, treating our politics as a substitute religion. That gets you into the messianic hope, which is the hope of the Talmud, and it's moving everything toward a new utopia, a new utopian vision of man. So this has been Dr. Deep State. I'd like to do another presentation going more deeply into the concept of the pictures in our heads and how that works in conjunction with chaos magic. And I'd like to do another episode of the final end here, which is something Giorgio Agamben would say has a logic that's built into democracy. He's one of my favorite philosophers. I refer to him in both my books. Links will be in the description section. He said the inevitable result of this libertarian order, when he sees how it's really put into a circuit, at its very core, this system that is the modern system of politics, has totalitarianism and has a telos, it has a direction, which he calls the camp. And I want to have us think about many of these prophecies include this idea of a camp. But what's more important is this idea of turning people made in the image of God into non-people. And he had a book called Homer Sacer, that he went all the way back to the Roman Republic and looked at this feature. Sometimes it was called the medieval werewolf. But a lot of these ideas that are coming out are really pointing to that direction. One example that I will cite is President Trump calling Chuck Schumer, he's a legislator in America, a Palestinian, making somebody that's not on board with the Zio project, which is really an extension of organized naturalism. Anybody not on board will be depersoned. And that's exactly the direction that Giorgio Agamben said that politics was going. He's an elderly Italian man, and he chimed in during the pandemic over the last few years and said, we see a forerunner of this. People that didn't participate, didn't take the operating platform, that was sort of we saw a sampling of that, of people that were depersoned. And so we're going to see more of that, given the logic embedded in our modern institutions and the agenda and the dialectics of people moving it toward that. The goal, getting all consciousness on board for that agenda. If you're not on board with it, you have to be eliminated from the body politic, or the pig has to be made kosher. So thank you, everybody, for joining me. And I will be back in short order to do a second part of this.